Hello, all. Welcome to this episode of My Architecture Dives. This is just going to be a talk show where I don't have any presentation, but I thought I'll take some time to talk through some architectural topics. It's just going to be a free flowing talk, whatever comes to my mind, I wanted to share. First of all, how will you architect a large system? This is a question which a lot of people have. And I should say that it comes through experience. The more and more systems you build, the more and more insights and knowledge that you gain. And you try to learn, unlearn, and this cycle continues. And finally, you come up with a good mindset or a good thought about what will work or what will not work. You'll have that inherent. Uh, I call it as gut feeling, right? So you'll know what works and what doesn't work. So that's done through years of architecting multiple systems and learning, unlearning, and basically imbibing the best practices. Another way of learning is textbook learning, where you have all the design patterns, architectural principles, anti patterns, frameworks, and things like that. So, yeah, if you're really smart, you can just pick up those and then try to architect a couple of systems and see how they succeed or fail and learn from there and take it from there on. But I'm going to talk from my 17 years of experience in the software field, mostly as an architect, and what I have seen, what I have done, and how I have built systems that have lasted for long. So the most important thing that many forget while architecting any system is that your product's architecture, the software architecture, and your infrastructure architecture have to complement each other. They have to go hand in hand. This is one of the biggest tricks of the trade, that I would say. Many of us just forget this fact and then we do this separately. For example, for 1,000 user software, you may create a 64 GB RAM and a 16 core machine, right, which will be utilized only for 3% or 4% CPU and maybe 10% of memory. So your cost goes for a toss. But on the other hand, I have also seen um, people giving less priority to infrastructure and giving more priority to the product architecture. And in this case, the reverse happens. Your software is good, but your infrastructure fails. And ultimately, in either cases, in both the cases, I should say, the impact is felt by the customer, which is not a good news for any architect or any organization. So the first thing, suppose you are getting a requirement of building any system, the first thing that you have to always understand is about the users of that system. Who is going to use it? That pretty much seals up your architectural um, pursuit, right? So if you're going to build a system that is required to serve, let's say, 1 million or 5 million users, then your thought process should be completely different. On the other hand, if you're going to build a system for 1,000 users, then you don't have to think much, but you'll just be doing with whatever you have at hand. You don't have to think much about it. Of course, when that scales up, that's a different story. But if you try to build a system for 1,000 people with the concepts that you will apply for 1 million or 5 million people, you over engineer that particular use case, and that's a recipe for disaster. So that you need to be very clear. Now, many people ask me this question: how do I build systems like the big e-commerce websites or banking websites or the trading websites where millions of users access them um, concurrently, and they don't seem to show any difference when load is applied on them. Yeah, that's pretty much a good point to discuss, start discussing, right? Now, fundamentally, there are two things that I always consider when I build systems. Your static data, which comprises of all your UI and all your data that will be served to the user through the browser, right? Of course, everything is served through the browser, but all the static data which doesn't change, which comprises of JavaScript files, CSS, images, etc., should be kept near to the user. And your database should be kept closer to your application server. So these two are very, very important things that you need to consider. Why? Because the moment your user hits a URL, if the static data is placed near them, they will get the URL loader. And if the database is near to the application server, then there won't be any round trips or latency, and you will get the response quicker. And of course, there is a strategy in positioning the servers according to the geographical location of the user, the usage of content distribution network, and so on and so forth, that we'll see later, right? Now, let's assume that, okay, we want to build a e-commerce website, and we know about the use cases, we know about the non-functional requirements like security, what level of security is needed, what level of scalability is needed. We know everything. Now, how do you get started? So the next question is, which technology should I be using? What is going to be the stack? Am I going to do a microservices model or a normal monolithic model? So there are a lot of things that you will have to consider. But my suggestion is, for any portal or e-commerce kind of sites where you have multiple stakeholders or multiple people acting on that ecosystem, microservices is your best bet, because it provides you with that independence. It provides you with high level of cohesion and low level of coupling, right? So let's assume that we are going to do with microservices. And when you think about microservices itself, your affinity to a particular technology stack should go off, because in microservices you can use whatever technology you want, how many ever modules you have. Each module can have a different database, a different UI, different business logic layer. No, there is no limit for that. So you don't have to worry about, uh, suppose if your expertise in Java, you should not be only thinking about Spring Boot. Or if you are a .NET based person, you should not be just thinking about .NET Core. Or if you're from a Python background, you should not be just thinking about Python. See, all these frameworks have a lot of advantages and disadvantages. Each of them have an advantage and a disadvantage. So first of all, you need to understand what kind of workloads are going to be in that system. And according to that workload, you'll have to choose your framework and your database. For example, let's say your workload is a banking workload. So their security is very important. Then the security is, if the security can be provided by the container, for example, the WebSphere or a WebLogic server, and if when cost is not that important when compared to security, then definitely you should go with the J2EE based solution, right? Because that's why you see most of the banking systems running on J2EE web servers, J2E application servers, right? On the other hand, if cost is a factor, then security, yeah, it should be good and things like that. Then you need to go for an open stack with multiple frameworks pitching in, right? So you need to go layer by layer, right? The UI layer. And if you have multiple applications, multiple microservices, each of them can have their own UI. can have their own business logic layer, and they can have their own database, right? And you are assembling each of these services as independent units, independent softwares. But the most important thing is integrating these services. They have to thrive perfectly in this disparate ecosystem. So how are you going to connect one service with the another? That's going to be the biggest question and the biggest challenge, right? Then you'll have to come up with very good API definitions for each of your service, all the inbound, the outbound APIs, the mode of transmission. Uh, like, are you going to have JSON based API, REST API, or XML based API? Whatever is going to be the mode of transmission. And most importantly, how you are going to secure your APIs, right? Are you going to use a token based mechanism? And how are you going to invoke these APIs? Are you going to have schedulers? Are these APIs going to be real time or batch based? So there are so many questions that come in that area. So you'll have to solve that. That's where you have tools like Swagger and things coming up. Swagger and things that are available, which you can use to define your APIs. So once you define your APIs, you need to do API testing. That is very, very important before you do anything else. So you can use tools like Postman to or your Google Developer Toolbar to test your API with the simulated load and see whether it is working, all the touch points are working properly. And then comes arranging your microservices in a way such that they can collaborate among themselves without any problem. Basically, you need an orchestrator there, right? Now, here is where you have multiple patterns in microservices. You have choreography, you have saga, you have event-driven architecture. So there are many things that you can do, because microservices gives you that flexibility to just it's like a Lego puzzle, right? You just pick and then plug it in the right place and it works, right? So now the next thing that I would look for is how many instances of my microservices do I need at a point of time, how I am going to discover them, what is going to be my service discovery layer, what is going to be my load balancer, so client side load balancer. So how am I going to put fault tolerance in my architecture? If one service fails, it should not block the other services, right? It has to gracefully shut down, or it has to come back within a stipulated amount of time. So there are lots and lots of microservices based patterns that are available. But I would say you need to arrange your microservices in a way that they can communicate among themselves through a broker. And that broker can be a gateway. Typically, you have a lot of gateways in the market, API, AWS API gateways there. You have engines and things like that. So each call can be routed through that API gateway if it is a smaller system. Or suppose you have 500 to 1000 microservices, and then with one API gateway you cannot manage that. So you need to have a concept called service mesh in this particular style of architecture. And service mesh is similar to API gateway at a smaller scale, where you can have meshes between microservices, and then each of these mesh will do all the load balancing, routing, and all those things. And your API gateway will only manage the traffic from the outside world. So API gateways can do a lot of functionalities, like they can authenticate, they can transform your APIs, they can route your APIs, they can triage your APIs, and they can do whatnot. No, API gateways are great tools that you'll have to use. So finally, for security, you can use JWT tokens or OAuth or whatever it is. Your security is mostly, it is better if you have time-bound tokens between exchanged between these systems, so that they are not sticky, basically, right? And your session management is very important. All your layers must be stateless. Each of your layers should be stateless. Each layer should be built with security, a good amount of security, scalability, everything. By layers, I mean, first of all, you should know the difference between layers and tiers, right? Layers are logical, tiers are physical. So you can have a UI layer, you can have a business logic layer, you can have a database layer, sometimes you might have a service layer, and each service might have multiple layers. So layers are nothing but the units of software, an independent unit of software, or the microservices. Each microservices can have multiple layers, right? So how you are going to layer that matters, and how communication happens through these layers is also very important. So ultimately, you have assembled a system where you have 100 microservices, you have, let's say, 5 to 6 service meshes, you have an API gateway, and now comes how you are going to deploy that. Are you going to deploy it in a virtual machine, or are you going to use containers, or are you going to use serverless? So these are some choices in front of you. Ultimately, any decision that you take in this with any of these particular approach should consider the customer's ease. Most importantly, the customer should be able to access your application without any hassles. That becomes the most important thing. So if you can just think about all those factors, um, then you can find out which one will be better, right? Serverless is good for certain use cases. Containers are great. Then you need to have container orchestration tools, and yes, containers are a good one to go. But even before you can start your journey on containers, I would suggest you can go with some virtual machines like EC2 or anything. Have your cloud footprint for a while, and then migrate into containers. So I think it's better if I have some images. Maybe when I have time, I'll put images and I'll go through one by one in a proper structured manner. But one thing that I wanted to highlight before I end today's talk is, even if you have the world's best architecture, if your developers don't code to complement your architecture, if there are bugs or if there are structural issues with your code, the basic, if your code is not refactored, if your code has a lot of duplicates, if your code is not going to scale, right? If your code has a lot of blocking entries, blocking calls, then definitely you're going to suffer after building your system. So right from day one, your developers should know the big picture of your system, and they should also know how their part fits into this particular architecture. So they should know both they should know both from a 5,000 feet level and also from a 100 feet level. So with that, I will end today's talk. Maybe in another talk, I'll get into details on uh, in one of those areas, and let's take it from there. Thank you.